Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Create and Consume, a podcast about what we make, watch, and buy in the era of digital content. I'm your host, Austen Tosone. So, when I was young, magazines were a huge part of how I first came to fall in love with fashion and beauty. I'm not sure how many of you know this, but my mom was actually a magazine editor too. And I never really pictured following in her footsteps. I don't even think I really truly understood what an editor did at the time. But as I'm sure you can imagine, our house was just filled to the brim with magazines growing up. And I remember once I was old enough to kind of start appreciating some of the teen magazines in particular, they really just overtook my life and became that thing that I would look forward to getting in the mail or picking up at Barnes and Noble. And I'm talking about the era of Teen Vogue and Cosmo Girl and 17 and just all of these publications that truly feel like a moment in time that we can all look back on and immediately remember how we were feeling and where we were and what we were wearing when we were buying these magazines. And in college, I really started trying to build up my resume to make myself a perfect candidate to become a magazine editor after school. That was still the thing that I wanted to do. And if you know me at all, I do know I if you know me at all, you know that I do go on to become a magazine editor, but that my path to kind of get there was not super straightforward. And my path since then has also not been super straightforward. So today I thought we could talk about this journey and kind of take a peek behind the curtain, especially what it was like to work for some of the biggest fashion magazines in the nation and how it helped me transition into the career that I have now as a digital content creator. I also just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you who listened to the first episode and shared about it or let me know your thoughts about it, and to all of you who are back for episode number 2. I'm pre recording all of these, so I have no idea who exactly I'm thanking or what exactly has happened since the first episode launched. But even if one person listened to this, I just want that person to know that I'm so appreciative and that I look forward to many more episodes to come. As always, before we dive into today's topic, I want to talk to you about what I'm creating and what I'm consuming this week. And as a reminder, consuming could be anything from what I'm shopping, what I'm buying, what I'm eating, what I'm, watching on YouTube or TikTok or Netflix. And then what I'm creating could be anything from if I'm creating new content, if I'm creating something in my home, if I'm creating something for a party or for an event that's coming up, and really just kind of sharing a look into that process because trust me, every week there will always be something. When I was brainstorming segments for this podcast, I was like, hey, the segment's in the name because I'm always going to be creating things and I'm always going to be consuming things. And of course, if you want to tell me what you're creating and consuming, you can do that by leaving a comment on this episode post over on Instagram or TikTok. I'm at Create and Consume Pod on both. So, in terms of what I am creating this week, I'm creating a lot of reels about the Met Gala. A lot of you guys care about fashion's biggest night. And I can't say that I blame you. So, for the Met Gala, I made the decision to start my coverage for the event about a month before it is happening. And I'm so glad I did that because I feel like it has truly led to built up excitement and a chance for people to start to kind of plant the seeds of like, oh, yeah, the Met Gala is coming up. And this girl who's talking about it is probably going to be creating content about it. So I should hopefully, tune in and watch more of her content. And I really wanted to spotlight this, whether or not it's still timely by the time this episode launches is kind of beside the point, but I did want to spotlight it because it's actually led to a lot of growth for me. I think I've gained like 1,500 Instagram followers on my main account since creating this content. And for me on Instagram, that is very substantial. Like, that is more than I feel like I've grown, I don't know, in about a year and a half's time. So I'm so grateful that this content is resonating with people. I'm glad people are finding it interesting, that they're finding it helpful, that they're sending it to their friend who maybe is also interested in the Met Gala. So that is something that I'm super excited about and something I've been really enjoying creating. Also, because I was actually an art history major in college, and I feel like I've learned so much more about the process and what goes into this event, the purpose behind it, and especially, what we could expect for this year's event. So that is really what I've been creating this week. As far as what I'm consuming this week, I have found myself in a Felicity rewatch, and I can't think of anywhere else that I would rather be, if I'm being honest with you. And if you don't know the show Felicity, it is a show from the late 90s. It was actually J.J. Abrams' first venture into television. So this was before Alias and then before Lost. And then obviously he went on to direct, Star Wars movies and many more things. He is very iconic. But Felicity was his first TV show that he was like a creator and producer of. So this TV show, if you just listen to the plot right now, you're going to think that this girl is absolutely psychotic, and I'll let you decide for yourself if you watch if that's correct or not. But the plot is this girl, Felicity, grew up in California, and her plan was always to go to Stanford and be a doctor. So we start at her high school graduation. She graduates. She's Stanford bound. Her parents are thrilled. And then she asks her high school crush, who, she's very shy and nerdy. She asks like the track star, popular guy, Ben, to sign her yearbook. And he ends up writing her this really profound message, something along the lines of, if we only had known each other, I think we would have really like loved each other and like gotten along. And that's not a spoiler, by the way. That happens literally like in the first 5 minutes of the show. So you can see how you can get hooked right away. So then she asks him as he walks away, like, where are you going to school? And he says, New York. So what would you do in this situation? What did my friend Felicity, portrayed by Carrie Russell, do? She said, cool. She scrapped the whole Stanford thing and then goes to the University of New York, it's supposed to be NYU, but they just can't call it that. So the University of New York, the school color is still purple. Okay. We all know where she is, and follows him there. And that is how the show starts. And it is a wild ride. It's very different, though, from other early 90s television shows. Like, it's not very, it's just so different in terms of the dialogue. And I think I compared it once to Dawson's Creek, saying Dawson's Creek is just so, it feels so dramatic, and Felicity feels a lot more like real life. Whereas in Dawson's Creek, they're always calling each other by their names. Pretty much no one ever uses names to directly address someone in Felicity. I know that sounds like such a subtle difference, but if you watch Dawson's Creek, the amount of times that they start and end sentences with each other's names, I don't know. It's just really something that I've caught on to now that I've watched the show. So, anyways, I would highly recommend giving Felicity a watch. It's available on Hulu, and I'm about to finish season 1, which is like going to be so good. Let's move on to today's main conversation, talking about my career journey from print to digital media. So, like I said, as a kid, magazines were my obsession. I would know pretty much the newsstand date for all of the classics, whether it be Teen Vogue, Cosmo Girl, 17. Those were some of my tried and true favorites over the years. Nylon also became a huge one. And there was even a magazine called Company that I believe was a UK magazine. And I remember there was kind of a turning point with that one where they had a cover featuring Zoella, who, if you guys know Zoella, I feel like we could do a whole other episode about OG YouTubers. I mean, the Zoellas of the world, the Jenna Marbles of the world. There's so much to get into there. But I remembered picking up an issue at one point where Zoella was on the cover. I was like, whoa, this YouTube girl is on the cover of a magazine. And lo and behold, we've certainly seen a lot more of that since then, especially with the rise of digital covers of magazines. But anyway, those magazines were always the ones that I was drawn to and that I gravitated towards just because they were so fun. They featured celebrities who I followed, and because they had fun fashion and beauty content too. And especially as a teenager who I had access to the Garden State Plaza. That was my mall growing up in Bergen County, New Jersey. And I had access to like the Rite Aid at the strip mall near where I grew up for beauty products and for drugstore beauty. So that was sort of the extent of my early year exposure to fashion and beauty in my immediate surrounding area. But magazines were always the gateway towards that more editorial fashion, towards that more professional or polished type of thing that I was really interested in. And when I grew up reading these magazines, originally in my teenage years, I really wanted to be an actress. Again, I feel like that could be a whole other episode. But I decided that, going the communications route and going, for magazines and for media was really something that I felt called to do just because I've always loved writing growing up. And especially flipping through the pages of a magazine, it was so cool to think about contributing to something like that came out every month, that was tangible, and that you held in your hand. So the first things I knew I had to do in college was basically get a bunch of internships and start to make connections. Because even though my mom, like I said, she was a magazine editor, she certainly had more kind of editorial connections in terms of more on the managing editor side and like some more of those types of roles. But in terms of the fashion and beauty side, I was still interested in the fashion industry in general. And I hadn't quite honed in 100% on editorial at that point because I had grown up watching like Project Runway and The Hills and all of those classics. So I just wanted to get as close as I could get to either fashion or editorial, basically whoever would take me. Because again, I was 18, I had like no experience. So I got my first internship with a designer that was in the garment district in the city. And never underestimate the power of 6 degrees of separation because here were I don't know if it was quite 6 degrees, but here were my degrees of separation between me and the designer who I ultimately interned for. So one of my friends from high school, that's one, her dad, that's two, was tutoring a kid for SATs, that's three, whose mom was a showroom owner, that's four, for designers in New York City. And then this designer, who I ended up interning for, that's five. So I had 5 degrees of separation. So my friend's dad's SAT tutor, tutee's mom, who was a showroom manager, ultimately, that was my thread to this designer. So I had been telling basically anyone who would listen that I was interested. My friend's dad said to this kid's mom, "Don't you own a showroom?" And then bada bing, bada boom. Very, very lucky. And, just really being super persistent and telling anyone who would listen that this was something I really wanted to do. So, anyway, that was my first internship. And then that was over the summer between my freshman and sophomore years of college. And then when I was a sophomore in college, I was able to do a fully remote internship for College Fashionista. I actually forgot to look up the name of what this was called. I think it was just called Style Intern or Campus Style Intern. And what I would do was go around and take outfit photos of people on my campus. And I went to Barnard College at Columbia University. So I could pick, friends from either school, which was great because I had a lot of stylish friends from both schools. And I would take a photo of their outfit and I would do a little write up about them. Like, okay, this student, Sarah, she is an econ major. She goes to Barnard. Tell me about your outfit today, Sarah. And I would take a photo of her and I would submit it to College Fashionista and they would get published on their website. So that was my first remote internship that I did. But I thought, this is great because this is like a digital publication. I'm getting to learn photography skills. I'm getting to learn interview skills. And I think that internship was not super competitive. I think lots of people were given the chance to do that because I think it was a popular content vertical for them at the time. But it was so great. And I thought, okay, now I've interned with a designer. I've interned, for this website. I think I'm ready to get into the editorial. So I was able to basically just send out cover letters to all of the big companies and say I'm interested in an internship pretty much at any magazine that will take me. And I just went through an interview process for a bunch of different ones. And I finally got a call for Marie Claire. And when I tell you, this was like it just dawned on me at the time. I was like, I feel like this is the biggest thing that's ever happened to me. I was so nervous for the interview. It was on the phone, but I think it went really well. And I talked about, I started my own blog and was like self publishing articles and shooting the content for it. And then at Columbia, I was directing a student fashion show. So I actually had some experience, taking care of pieces that we had borrowed from New York City based designers and making sure that they got to our students on time, in time for the fashion show, and that they, took good care of them and wore them and then got them back to the designers in one piece. By the way, I'm aware that I use as a filler, but as a new podcaster, I'm going to ask that you cut me a little bit of slack as I get better about my stream of consciousness speaking, because I want to make sure that I am doing a good balance of storytelling and kind of staying on track of my little bullet points that I've made for myself for each episode. So if there is a bit of filler in there, I do apologize, but I'm hoping that you'll stick with me as I continue to improve on this. So anyway, after telling the Marie Claire fashion assistant all of that, turns out that I got hired and I got the job. Interning at Marie Claire that summer was incredible. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was a ton of work. It was definitely unpaid, but it was incredible. And for context, my first day at Marie Claire, I believe I got there at 8:30 a.m. and I left at midnight. And that was not, luckily, a regular occurrence through the rest of the summer. But at the time, Marie Claire was looking to launch this like offshoot publication of theirs called Branche. And I actually have a copy of Branche around here somewhere. I know because I recently took it from my parents' house because I wanted to look at it again and remember the crazy day that we were putting that issue together. But they ended up needing interns, to pack up the trunks and to go over to the set, which was at the Carlisle Hotel on the Upper East Side. I was thrilled. I honestly didn't even really notice it was midnight until I walked outside and genuinely saw that it was dark out. And we basically, the first day, we were just assisting on set of the photo shoot for this offshoot magazine. And I was so happy. I mean, again, it was a long day. They did get us dinner, which was really nice because we were there so late. But could you imagine that being your first day at an internship and walking away and thinking that was so fun? But that was just how eager and excited I was to join the industry. And in my head, I was like, well, this is just how it is, though. Like, this is what you have to do to make it at a fashion magazine. So luckily, the rest of the days were not like that. I usually was able to leave around 6 or 6:30. I think I went in around 9. Became more of a standard issue unpaid internship. And by the way, I think this was about 3 days a week. And at this point, I think I also had my job at Free People. I was a stylist at Free People at Rockefeller Center, which is their New York flagship store, for about 3, maybe a little more than 3 years in college. So even though I had my unpaid internship, I was still working a couple days a week at Free People. So honestly, living the New York City college student summer dream, if you ask me. And at the time, that was just a great segue into other internships as well. So, what I would usually do, since I was going to college in New York City, which was certainly a huge advantage, was I would always have a summer internship of some kind. And then I would leave fall a bit more open to take more classes. And then in spring, I would take a slightly lighter class load so that I could intern again in the spring semester, because those spring internships were a lot less competitive versus every college student in the country wants to try to come to New York to intern during the summer months because they have that time off and they can be away from school. But for me, being in New York during the spring semester was a huge opportunity to intern. So even though I can only do usually 2 days a week, but sometimes that was enough for companies, which was great. So what ended up happening next was my friend Ava had just wrapped up an internship at Nylon, and she was like, "Hey, I think they're looking for more people for next semester if you want, the email contact for this person." And the thought of interning at Nylon honestly intimidated me so badly. I was like, okay, I mean, Marie Claire, like, yeah, I've worked hard. Like, it's a professional magazine. It was in the Hearst Tower in Midtown. I was like, Nylon, though, is like Oh my God. Like Marie Claire seemed kind of untouchable in like a prestigious fashiony type way. And then Nylon just seemed untouchable in the indie cool, like an aura of cool was just surrounding it at all times type way. And I was like, would they even like let me in the door at Nylon? Oh my gosh, that was so crazy to think about. And again, I think this was just my own inner monologue, which I never said anything like this out loud to anyone because I didn't want people to think I didn't think I belonged there. But it just goes to show we all have our own doubts and insecurities, and that you should push through them and ignore them as much as you can because it could lead to some great opportunities. So because of, all the networking I did, like I had gotten to know Ava, and then she introduced me to Lisa, who ended up hiring me at Nylon as an intern. That was just incredible, getting to be an editorial intern there and work on so many stories and transcribe interviews, listening in on conversations with celebrities and things like that. I highly enjoyed it, and I got my first print bylines, and I still have the issues of Nylon. Dakota Fanning is on the cover. I think it's May 2015 is the issue. If you happen to have that, you can go look and see. I have a byline somewhere in the arts and culture section. It's a little tiny paragraph, but that's my first print byline. And then after that, I was interning at Cosmo.com. So that was my first .com. And were we still calling it that back then? I guess we were. This would have been like 2015, 2016, in the fashion and beauty department of Cosmo.com. And that was so cool. And that internship, it wasn't listed anywhere. Literally, I saw, I followed this website that I believe my mom had told me about called Ed 2010, that was listing internship opportunities and things like that. And, I was refreshing it daily to see what's the next internship, what could I do next. And they also sometimes would host things like networking events. So I saw they were hosting a networking event with Cosmo.com editors. It didn't say anything about an internship. It was clearly for people who wanted, jobs, who were probably post grad already. But I didn't care. I breezed right in there and I went up to, like, I had Googled everybody's names and then what they looked like. So I went up to one of the editors and I was like, "Hi, I'm Austen. I don't need a job or anything, but I would really love to intern for Cosmo.com this summer." And I believe I said that to this woman, Helen, who then said, "Oh, let me go get Brooke." So Brooke was the fashion and beauty assistant editor at the time, spoke with her, and she was like, "Sure, I could always use an intern. Like, here's my card." And I sent her an email and we had a phone interview and I got that gig. That was so much fun. I really made interning at Cosmo.com my whole personality that summer. And that was my first time also, or I think I might have had one Nylon.com byline, but seeing my name published on Cosmo.com, that was like, who am I to be talking about all these things? Again, it was so exciting and I knew I could do it deep down and I knew I had done my research and done good work, but it was just so crazy to see it all in action. Then after that, my friend Devin, who's actually a close friend of mine from grade school, we're still friends now. We had recently reconnected in our college years because she was interning. I think she was interning at T when I was interning at Nylon. Anyway, and she had just wrapped an internship at New York Magazine, and she was like, "They need interns for this next semester." So this was my senior year spring. And she said, "Do you want me to introduce you to Caitlin, who was the managing editor?" And I was like, "Yes, oh my God." And guys, New York Magazine, I will always be grateful to them for this. It was a paid internship. So if we're counting now, I did the designer, college fashionista, Nylon, Cosmo, Marie Claire. This was my sixth internship, and this was the first one that was paid. Wow. What a time it was to be an unpaid intern in New York City from, what was that, 2014 to 2016. So thank you, New York Magazine, for paying me to be your intern. That was actually kind of unbelievable, and I'm very grateful. Anyway, I could even probably do a whole other deep dive on some of these internships, but I want to get to the actual career portion of this chat since I've already been talking for 24 minutes, which, I think this is going to make me a really good podcaster, you guys, because I'm always going to have more to tell you. So it was my senior spring semester, right? I'm interning at New York Magazine. Things are going well, but they don't have anything open. So I just start reaching out to everyone who I've come in contact with basically over the last 3 years through all of these internships, just letting anyone and everyone no, I'm graduating. I would like a job. I was like, it could pay $20 a year and I would take this job. Because again, that's just what I thought the magazine world consisted of. And in some ways, I was sort of right. So I reached out to all my former intern contacts and heard back from Lisa at Nylon, who had hired me to be an intern there. And when I tell you, I walked into the Nylon office and I thought we were just having like a casual catch up. She had said, you can bring your resume. When they sat me down and they were telling me, yeah, so we do have an opening for an editorial assistant. So if you want to fill out this edit test, blah, blah, blah. I was like, wait, there's an actual possibility that I could have a job here. And for some reason, my confidence had really grown at the time. And I like filled out the application and I sent it in and I was just feeling so good about it. I was like, this job is mine. And as it turned out, I was actually right, which is crazy. So I started at Nylon. I graduated in May and I started at Nylon in June. So the first issue that I was working on was the August 2016 issue, which was the denim issue. I was just so on top of the world. You guys, I was riding so high. I could not believe this was my job. They started assigning me print bylines. Eventually, I was really helping and taking over the fashion news section and the arts section, which was part of Culture Club. Oh my gosh. And I was on the editorial team technically, but I got to work really closely with the fashion and beauty teams as well, which was so appreciated because at the end of the day, we were the ones kind of helping with and coordinating all of the copy, whereas the fashion editors were more so coordinating the concepts for photo shoots and the ideas that they had and so on and so forth. And I mean, there were some very legendary names in and out of the Nylon offices, which is so cool. I mean, Jay Erico, Danny Stahl. Oh my gosh, just even thinking about it, like when those people would walk into the room, you would know. You would know and you would be like, what do you need? Can I help you with something? And it was just so insanely cool. Nylon, once I was like an employee there, I definitely felt a huge need to prove myself. I tried to always be the first one in, the last one to leave. Sometimes being the last one to leave was kind of hard because sometimes editors would come in a little later in the day. I think we technically started at 10, which to me as an early bird I was like, what? I was like, I will be there by 9:30 the latest. So sometimes people would roll in at like 10:30, 11, and then they would end up staying later. I liked though that it was not super stringent. And like if you had an interview in the morning or you had a preview to attend, like that was all okay. You just wanted to communicate it to whoever you were with. So it was a lot more grown up and I felt a lot less like an intern and more like a valued team member for that reason. And then I also started getting invited to New York Fashion Week, which was like a literal dream come true. Like I would get these invitations and I would have like an actual seat number and stuff. And I was like, I can come and I can sit second row at this show. It was just so unbelievable and so exciting. There were a lot of late nights. I ate a lot of ramen because you know how I made the joke about, oh, you could pay me $20. Well, it wasn't $20, but it certainly wasn't a very livable salary either. And thank God my rent at the time in my little East Williamsburg apartment that I found on Facebook was $1,000 a month and that our landlords never raised the rent. That was actually also a time to be alive in New York City in 2016 until when did I move out of there? 2019. Oh man, me and my two roommates and our cat Sassy. It was just I literally felt like my life was a TV show. And in a lot of ways it kind of was. But then in partway towards the end of season 2, I guess, of that TV show, if we're counting how long I was at Nylon, that's when the magazine folded. Dun dun dun. And I got laid off and it was horrible. I mean, at that point, that was truly like the worst thing that had ever happened to me in my life. And I know that's so dramatic. And in the last, 4 to 5 years, tons of people have been laid off and had career changes. But oh my God, it just felt really like the end of the world for me at the time. And I remember I called my new ish boyfriend, Andrew, and was like sobbing and was like, I have a box of my stuff. I'm coming to your apartment. Be there when I get there. He was like, "Oh my god, like what just happened? What do I have on my hands right now?" And it was just horrible because I was blindsided. Like, I had gotten a raise at the end of the year to an actual livable salary. We were trying to relaunch Nylon Guys as a quarterly print magazine. Like, I just had no indication how bad things were with the print. And that was 2017. That was September 2017. And also, it was the middle of Fashion Week. So I just had absolutely no idea that was coming. And we got laid off. They said you have 2 weeks of severance, but your health insurance ends at the end of the month. And bye bye. Nice knowing you. And I think that was a really big wake up call for me because I was so convinced that I was like such an irreplaceable part of the team that nothing could ever possibly happen to me. Even if something like that did happen to me, when they said the print was folding, we were like, are we getting absorbed by digital? Is it just all digital now? Like, that's fine. We know how to do that. Pretty much every print editor contributed a little bit to digital in some way, whether it was just uploading certain print pieces to the website or actually actively writing some stuff for digital, which I was doing because in my spare time, I was like, can I write more for digital on my very bad salary as an editorial assistant in the beginning? But yeah, there's no way to describe it other than I had just turned 23, like literally had just celebrated my 23rd birthday. I remember the photo shoot, red dress, sparkly Prosecco bottle, as we do in 2017. And yeah, like a few days later in the middle of Fashion Week, laid off. So, luckily for me, I was only out of work for about a month after that because my angel editor in chief, Melissa, love you, Melissa, she knew Catherine, who was the managing editor at Interview magazine, which ironically was 4 floors down from where we worked at Nylon. So we were in the Soho building on Green Street. Nylon was on the 6th floor, and then Interview at Brant Publications was on the 2nd floor. So you can imagine my slight hesitation walking back into that building for my interview at Interview. I heard myself about to say that, and I was like, that's going to sound funny when it comes out of my mouth, and it did. But I went in and I interviewed with the editor in chief, Nick, who I liked instantly. I was like, this guy is cool. He gets it. And it went really well. And they offered me the same role that I had at Nylon. They offered me assistant print editor. So I started there. And that was, like I said, I was only out of work for about a month. Interview was very different from Nylon, though. I mean, I kind of think of Interview, they're not owned by the same people at all, but I always looked at Interview after working there for a few months and looked at Nylon and thought, okay, if Nylon is like a cool, 19-year-old girl who lives in New York City and has her roommates and all that, I was like, Interview is like her 29 to 30-year-old cousin who's a lot more highbrow and like goes to gallery openings and has started wearing, like the Row and like some of those kind of fashion brands over, I don't even know, like the Rebecca Minkoff purses. Hopefully you see what I'm getting at here. And by the way, Interview had even a higher age range of an audience than 29 or 30. Just in my head, it was almost like Nylon's cool older cousin, if that makes sense. So Interview was, I didn't really know a ton about it because I grew up as a Nylon reader. But like I said, Interview I think was geared towards a bit more of an older audience. So I didn't really grow up reading Interview. The only thing I actually knew about it was that it was started by Andy Warhol. Because again, I was an art history major at Barnard. So Interview compared to Nylon was so much more celebrity focused. And I knew the baseline celebrity stuff, like I knew about Taylor Swift, I knew about Beyonce, I knew about, you know, any Disney or Nickelodeon star, obviously, from my teenage years. But I didn't necessarily know in depth the level of detail of all of these different celebrities like the people at Interview did. So that was a big adjustment for me because at Nylon, it was enough to be kind of in the mix and like start to learn who some of these more up and coming indie people were. But to then take a step back and realize that I didn't know a ton about people who, by the way, are still huge names, but just that I had never done my research on, that I didn't know this person was married to this person. I didn't know the backstory of the hit song by this person that all tied together into the mainstream pop culture and even like the next level down from mainstream pop culture. So there was just so much for me to learn. And even doing like at Nylon, tasks started to become very second nature to me. But at interview, we used to help prep the talent on talent interviews, which is what the magazine was really known for. Whenever there was a cover story and there was a celebrity on the cover, they were always interviewed by another celebrity. And I used to think, oh, like those two people just get on the phone, start talking, and we record it. No, not the case. And I don't think Interview as a publication gets enough credit for really spearheading that interview format and for how well they did it. And I can see now, having worked there, how much preparation goes into those cover interviews because other magazines have tried to do it, and reading them, you can tell that they just put two people on the phone and that they just hit record. And I don't think it's as interesting as when our editorial team would really do research for the two people who were talking to each other, even if they were friends, even if they were castmates, even if they knew each other pretty well, to make sure that we covered all of the bases that would be interesting for the reader. And to me, that was one of the most valuable experiences I took away from working there, was exactly what goes into that, coordinating with different talent and things like that. It was just so cool to be a part of and to start to understand how these really big hitting interviews actually came together. So Interview was a bit more short-lived, but I have to say I loved all of my coworkers, especially more of like the junior editorial staff and the digital team. So we would always go out in Bushwick because most of us lived in Bushwick / Williamsburg. We would always go out to this place called the Wheelhouse on Wednesdays because they had half-price bottles of wine and you could make any grilled cheese that you wanted. So we called them Wheelhouse Wednesdays. And as it started to become clear that, things maybe weren't going so well for Interview, there were just some signs, I'll leave it at that. But we started doing Wheelhouse Wednesdays a lot more. So it was so nice to at least have camaraderie with my coworkers and everything. So by the time they finally announced that the print magazine of Interview was folding, at least I was not as surprised as Nylon. And I compare it to a breakup a lot, where Nylon was like being blindsided by the person that you love and you never saw one red flag. Interview was a lot easier to process because the writing was a little bit on the wall for us. We just kind of had this sense of dread, which, if any of you work in media, I know you understand this. And so when Interview folded, it was what it was. Luckily, I had a trip to London booked to visit my friend Nora literally the following week. So that was a great distraction. I went to London. I just started, posting more outfit photos and kind of turning back to the blog, which, by the way, I had been keeping up with the entire time I was at Nylon and Interview. My coworkers from Nylon, it would be like, hey, do you want to get lunch and like go grab an outfit picture? It was certainly not like frowned upon by any means, but I tried not to talk about it too much working at other publications because it's not like my blog was a threat or anything. But at the end of the day, this was still sort of a time where editors were seen as editors and like Instagram was sort of up and coming in the background. But, you know, magazines and publications that were print first and then launched digital, I feel like we're a little bit more slow to position their editors on their own social channels and to really promote them across different things. Less so compared to digital first publications like Refinery 29, which I think did a lot with editors like Alyssa Coscarelli. Her handle is Alyssa in the City, if you know her. I mean, she was on live streams for them. She was, for articles, she would have her face was like one of the photos of the header photos being like, here's what our Refinery 29 editor wore to Fashion Week, not just here's like the Fashion Week recap. Digital first publications were really putting editors in the forefront. And I didn't really get to take advantage of that at Interview and Nylon because they weren't really spotlighting editors as much. I mean, once Nylon went digital only and then eventually got bought by Bustle Digital Group, they've started doing that a lot more since then. But it wasn't really something that print publications were doing, especially trying to keep the separation between what we decide to include just at our own editorial discretion, versus in influencer culture, you're sometimes being paid to promote products, or you have more of an incentive to promote something beyond just that you like it. So that's always kind of been a line that I think has gotten so blurry over the years. But when I was a young assistant editor, it really was like a harsh line, for lack of a better term. So here I was. I think I was still 23 because it had only been 8 months since my birthday and since I'd gotten laid off from Nylon and then interview folded in May of what year was that? 2018, I guess. So I'm still 23. I've been laid off twice and I live in New York and have rent to pay. What's a gal to do? Well, I had my blog and I had so many connections, many of whom, when they saw I got laid off again, said, please pitch me, please reach out. Let me help you in some way. Even if I can't commission a story of yours or something, let me introduce you to people. And I'm very grateful for everyone who connected me to new people and helped me during that time and actually answered my emails, even if things weren't a fit. All of those people helped contribute to my success as a freelance writer during that time. And even though I was taking on a lot of low paying assignments at the time, or, low paying may be a relative term. If you're trying to make a full time living as a freelancer and you're trying to pay your rent and you're trying to make sure you have enough money for taxes and make sure you have enough money just to do occasional fun things because you live in New York and you're 23, it was just a lot to juggle and balance sometimes. So some of the articles that I would write were more like shopping roundups, like little quick things that I loved writing, but just on paper didn't necessarily pay super well. But some places were, paying more fair rates, and I got to do more robust interviews and got to do so many fun things. And sometimes I would take on more trending stories. And I actually did do some like trending coverage for Insider during the Met Gala. So I remembered writing about, oh, this celebrity wore sneakers to the Met Gala. Like, whoa, what a shocker. Or like, this person's outfit is the perfect culmination of the theme. So those kind of more one-off trendy articles maybe paid something like $80 an article, I think. And then at the time, the more robust, like interviewed, researched pieces that I would do would pay more like up to $400, which was good. But you can see how you still need to like stack a lot of these together in order to make a real living. But I got to do so much during this freelance period, and I got my byline in so many places that I could have only dreamed of. Like if you went back and said to 18-year-old Austen, hey, you're going to be published in Refinery 29, you're going to be published in Fashionista, Teen Vogue, Refinery, all of these places. Did I say Refinery twice? I guess I won't know until I go to edit this. Anyway, HuffPost, there were just so many more. And I was so grateful to get this exposure and to build my resume like this. But day to day, it was still so hard. And at the time, I would say probably 60% of my income was coming from editorial freelance writing. So for like those publications that I just mentioned, probably about 10% of my income was coming from copywriting, which I wasn't totally in love with. I actually liked product copywriting, like writing the literal descriptions of a product on a brand's website, more than copywriting for other things. Like I had answered some calls for copywriters on Facebook groups like Freelancing Females and on other websites, where I was looking for work, where people would want me to write like their about me copy on their website, and they would just have such a specific idea of what they wanted. And I was so inexperienced from a copywriting perspective that those weren't necessarily my favorite assignments. I really liked doing product descriptions and email marketing copy for, like, I was working for one fashion brand where I was doing their weekly emails and their social media copy, which was really fun. But the other 30% of my income, so if 60% was from editorial writing, mostly for digital, by the way. I think I got like one print assignment in that entire time, and that told me everything I needed to know about my career and my future as a print magazine editor, which was probably not going to happen. So 60% was freelance writing, about 10% was copywriting, and then about 30% was coming from my little old blog and my Instagram account. And that was kind of the stuff that I was most excited about. And at the time, it was a lot less competitive then. So a lot of the influencer networks where you could apply to campaigns, I was landing a lot more of those. Like most of the ones that I applied to that I really put the effort into and was truly interested in, I was getting. So I got to work with like ASOS, CVS Beauty, the New York Times, CBS Love Island when they premiered in the US. That was a really good feeling. And I just kept feeling like that was more the direction that I was supposed to be going to. But because of how small my audience was, and because I was still trying to pay the bills mainly with freelance writing, because it was the biggest chunk of my income, I was just feeling a little bit like, I know this is maybe possible at some point, but I'm not really sure how this is going to happen and come together right now. Let's fast forward to August of 2019. So I've been freelancing and doing the blog thing for like a year and 3 months at this point, and I love it. I mean, I love being my own boss. I love going to events, but I'm not really making the money I want to make, and I'm kind of just barely like hitting my financial goals each month, which can be a stressful feeling, especially when you live in such an expensive city. So I check my Twitter DMs, and there's a DM from a girl who I went to Columbia with named Nikita. And she's like, "Hey, hope all is well. Um, Super random, but I think I have the perfect job for you." I was like, "Wait, what the heck?" I'm like trying to figure out, like, she and I were casual friends at Columbia. We ran into each other at parties and kind of shared a few mutual friends and things like that. So I was like, "What do you mean? And what do you do?" So it turned out she was more in the like venture capital investing side of things, which meant that she knew of a lot of up and coming startups and that she knew a lot of people who were founders. And she was like, "I was just talking to this guy who's founding this new company. It's a startup, and they're looking for a beauty content director." And my serotonin, like, I think my whole body just started tingling. I was like, "Beauty content director?" I was like, "What the heck is that?" Because I would love to do that, whatever the heck that is. So she sends me the job description and then connects me to the founder of a company called Jump Rope. So next thing you know, I'm having coffee at a cute Tribeca coffee shop with Jake, who's the founder of Jump Rope. And we're talking, and I love everything he's telling me. He's talking about social media and his vision for what he wanted this app to look like and what my role would be when I came on. I was like, "This sounds great." I was like, "Do I feel like this is the right next step for me?" Because in my head, if I were to ever have gone the freelance route, in an ideal world, I would have loved to like work for three big magazines and then kind of become more of a freelance writer and possibly dabble more in the blog stuff if that trajectory had kind of panned out. So at this point, I was like, I have worked for two big magazines, and I kind of knew what to expect at those publications. And it's not to say I couldn't have gone on to work at other publications or that I wasn't applying for jobs at, more digital focused jobs at places like Refinery and Teen Vogue and all those places. But I was like, I think I could really like not only help this company based on my experience, but I feel like I'm going to learn a lot if I'm here. And I was absolutely right about both, I think. So I ended up doing kind of a 2-week freelance contract with them just to see how did I like the job, how did they like me, and so on. And really, like, this all came together at the perfect time. So I joined the company, I accepted a full-time offer, and this was my first time accepting an offer that was a base salary that was actually like a livable wage, and also getting stock options because it was a startup. So that was really fascinating. And I mean, the first 6 months at Jump Rope were like picture perfect. I mean, I was absolutely loving it. I was telling all my creator friends about the app, they were using it. I was going to meetings at like Glossier and Maybelline talking about how their communities, like, a lot of beauty brands will have ambassadors or people who they gift products to or affiliates and stuff like that, and how they could have their community members easily create content using the app and all of these different things. And it was all going swimmingly until about March 2020. And you all know what happened at that time. So a couple of different things were happening with me. Number one, my dad had a really, really bad case of COVID, and he was like patient zero at the hospital where I grew up. And it was a terrifying time where we didn't know what was going to happen with him. So Andrew and I, after we had quarantined for, I guess, 2 weeks, we were able to get home to my parents' house and stay with my mom. But we essentially ended up moving in with her for like 3 months as my dad got treated, and thank God as he recovered, and ultimately came home. So my dad got sick in March, and he didn't come home until early July, which is crazy. For the record, he's doing very well now, and we're super grateful, but it was an extremely scary and traumatic time. I was still working full time, but we were working fully remotely. And luckily, work was very understanding. If I had to jump off, if I was like, the hospital's calling, like, this is something I need to go deal with. And I'll always be grateful for that flexibility and the fact that I had that job at all during the pandemic when so many things were uncertain and so many people were losing their jobs. So those couple of months were honestly just a bit of a blur for me, at least thinking about like a work perspective. When I kind of finally came up for air, kind of towards the end of the summer and early fall, a lot of what I had started to build for fashion and beauty had kind of fallen apart because of the pandemic. And while my categories were not doing super well, the other categories on Jump Rope, like food and DIY, they were doing really well. And I was super happy for my fellow like category leads, for lack of a better term. So I was doing a lot of fashion and beauty stuff. Another girl was doing food. Another girl was doing DIY, home, crafts, that whole umbrella, like the HGTV of Jump Rope. And I was so happy their categories were doing well, but there wasn't a ton going on in mine. And so my day-to-day responsibilities just totally shifted from what I was originally doing. And again, the company could have said at any point, hey, your categories, they're not doing well, like sayonara. But they really were working to, make sure that I could still have a place there. So I kind of started helping with some other categories, trying to help grow them that weren't as big as kind of the big, 4 or 5 that we were all kind of the community heads for. I also was helping our CEO with like some presentations and things like that. But at the end of the day, I just kind of had this feeling in my, this pit in my stomach. We found out that we were going to be fully remote forever, that we were never going back to an office and stuff like that. And I just kind of felt in my head like, I feel like this is maybe my time to actually go out on my own, hopefully leave on my own terms. I mean, I'd gotten laid off twice. Like, to leave a job is one thing, but to leave a job not on your terms is very frustrating. And at this point, I went back and I looked at all my math and everything, and I said, could I even do this? Like, am I making enough money to do this? Or even if I'm not making money, what makes me think I'm going to make money if I actually do this? And I went back and looked, and I realized that I had been able to make 5 figures from my content creation side hustle in the last 2 years where I had still been working full time. And to me, that was proof of finances, at least. And the fact that I had been blogging since 2012 and it was now 2021 at this point, I was like, okay, I've been doing this for about 8 years just as a side hustle. And in the last 2 years, I've made 5 figures from doing it. So I have proof of concept. I know I like doing this, and I have proof of income, which is kind of huge. So I did it. I put in my 2 weeks in April of 2021, and I just celebrated 3 years of being a full-time content creator. And this actually is very emotional now that I'm at the end to like talk about it and look back on it. And I'm just so grateful for, like, now that I've just talked through what feels like a whole decade of my career through my 20s. I just have learned so much, and so many people have helped me along the way. Oh my God, I didn't not know I was going to cry. And I'm just so appreciative for everything I've learned. And like I said, for everyone who's helped me, who has taken the time to, like, read a cover letter or look at my portfolio or give me a shot, give me an assignment, just because maybe even they needed someone extra that week. And the fact that I was there in the right time and at the right place, it just means so much. So if I could share anything, if I could kind of sum all of this up into one big takeaway, I just think that it's never too late to change your mind about your career. And you just never know who along the way is going to help you and give you that next opportunity. And I have really prided myself on prioritizing networking and being nice to people and trying to return favors when I'm given them as well. And I don't think I would be here without all of those people and every road bump and every big win and every other, thing that's happened along the way. So if you feel like your career journey has not been super straightforward and not on a super clear path, believe me, you're not alone. But there's also still so much more to do, and there's so much more out there, and you really can do anything that you want. All right. Well, we've laughed, we've cried, which is so embarrassing, but I feel like this is my trusted people, so you're in it with me now, whether you like it or not. You made it all the way to the end of the second episode, which means the world to me. So thank you so much for listening in. Remember, you can support Create and Consume podcast for free by doing any of the following. You can leave Apple and Spotify ratings and reviews. You can like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you're watching on YouTube so you get notified when new episodes drop. You can follow along at Create and Consume Pod on Instagram and TikTok. You could send this episode to a friend who may enjoy it. And don't forget to check out createandconsumepodcast.com for episode recaps and more. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.